This is a map of Europe. Almost perfectly located in its center is this city, Vienna, the capital of Austria. It's both remarkably beautiful and remarkably safe, with its vast history of the art usually acting as the magnet for its numerous visitors. However, what if I told you that alongside this, the city also has a much darker story to tell? You see, it's not widely known, but in the past 20 years, Vienna has become a hotbed for foreign espionage services. Quite literally, hundreds of spies are currently estimated to be operating in the Austrian capital. They are drawn from all across the globe, but are mainly from states with a significant anti-West political direction, such as China and Iran, with the vast majority of them belonging to both the notorious SVR and FSB services of the Russian Federation. Moscow currently has around 180 accredited diplomats present in Vienna, around 60 of which are known to be using the role as cover for performing intelligence gathering activities. Now, I know what you're thinking. If this information is known, why isn't anything being done about it? Well, the answer to this is steeped in Austria's history of neutrality and how this has led to the state having rather murky laws on the matters of both espionage and counter-espionage. See, Austria is often interpreted as being heavily westernized, and to an extent it is. It's a highly functioning member of the European Union, and Vienna plays host to a number of important global non-governmental organizations, such as the OSCE, OPEC, and branches of the United Nations. It's a democratic state and isn't interpreted by the average Westerner as being of any real threat to the West, its progression and values. And again, this is absolutely true. But on the flip side, Austria also takes practically the same stance against states who are seen as being anti-West. They won't stand in their way either. This makes Austria one of only 21 states in the world who claim geopolitical neutrality. But you see, for Austria, this position of complete geopolitical neutrality goes beyond just rhetoric, as neutrality has actively formed part of the state's constitution since 1955. And you'll never guess who demanded that this be the case. Yes, Moscow. Following the end of the Second World War, there was much discussion between the occupying Soviet Union and the Allied forces about the future of Austria. For the first 10 years after the war, Austria didn't exist as a singular state, but was rather divided in its administration between the Soviet Union, United States, United Kingdom, and France, much like Germany had been in the immediate aftermath of the war. Unlike Germany, however, it was decided that Austria would become a buffer state between the West and the Soviet Union. This was an agreeable position for all sides involved, especially the Austrian nationalists, who would finally be able to have control of their country back. Well, the majority of control at least. Stalin greatly feared that Austria would quickly be influenced into aligning itself with the West, should it not be forced into neutralization. Eventually, the West agreed to Stalin's demands for Austrian neutrality, and so it was asserted into its constitution that the state would never enter into any military alliance, or ever allow the construction of non-state military bases on its territory. But you see, whilst this was the most telling component of Austria's indefinite commitment to neutrality, various other laws which emphasized the same commitment were also enacted. These included laws on economic neutrality, which have since been removed, following its accession to the European Union in 1995. And most significantly, its laws which supposedly regulate espionage activity within the state. And it is here that we see how Austria's interpretation of neutrality has led to Vienna becoming an epicenter for unregulated espionage, sitting within the heart of Europe. This is a report of Austria's laws on espionage within its state boundaries. Obviously, you can't read it all right now, so here's the summary. It's divided into 3 sections only. These are sections 254, 256, and 319. Section 254 simply details that it's illegal to leak Austrian state secrets to foreign powers. But it is sections 256 and 319 which are most interesting. Between them, what they tell us is that it's illegal for any military intelligence service to be set up within Austrian territory, full stop. Along with this, it's illegal for any secret intelligence service to be constructed and run from within the territory if, and this is critical to the story, if it is to the detriment of the Republic of Austria. See, what this essentially means is that, instead of taking a neutral position in which it outlaws all foreign espionage activity on its territory, Austria takes the position that its territory is allowed for utilization by foreign secret intelligence services to compete in their geopolitical battle, just so long as Austria itself is not the target. These laws have allowed for Austria, and Vienna especially, to become a home to various units of secret intelligence services from around the world. The CIA, MI6, Mossad, MSS, you name it, and it's probably there. In a way, it really is the epitome of neutrality, as the opportunity to get involved is technically open to all, and this has been utilized by espionage services with various geopolitical ambitions. As mentioned, those who wish to destabilize the global dominance of the West and the US have stationed intelligence operatives in Vienna, while simultaneously the US themselves have utilized the city as the location for numerous NSA espionage stations. It's basically just one big spy playground. However, as also already mentioned, there is one country which has capitalized on Vienna's espionage capabilities in a far greater capacity than any other, and that is of course Russia. But why? Why is it that Russian intelligence assets are so much more prevalent in this espionage black spot than others? And what are the ramifications, if any, for Austria as a state? Well, the first of these questions is relatively straightforward and can be answered through the examination of two factors. Firstly, it is quite natural for Russia to be interested and exploitative of any legal espionage loopholes which present an opportunity for a greater infiltration of Russian influence throughout Europe as a whole. This is because out of all major states who have significant secret intelligence services and would seek to try and challenge the present Western-dominated global order, Russia is the one in closest proximity to Europe, along with perceiving it as posing its greatest threat. You see, since the end of the Cold War, the Kremlin's control in Europe has significantly diminished, with its various satellite states mostly transitioning into fully fledged members of Western institutions. A fact that at first did not significantly worry Moscow, but that more recently has been treated as a definitive threat, mostly during Vladimir Putin's current premiership. Any control Russia had in Europe has most certainly been diminished by the expansion of NATO since the start of the century, whose dominance of the continent can be easily witnessed from the examination of this map. For Moscow, this expansion has not only diminished its sphere of influence, but has also limited its espionage capabilities within the continent, making it increasingly difficult for the re-establishment of a Kremlin-centered sphere of influence. But this increasing difficulty has not stunted Russia's desires in trying to destabilize the continent's Western domination, as agents of both its SVR Foreign Intelligence Service and FSB Federal Security Service continue to operate across the continent, usually under the disguise of diplomacy. It's the job of these agents to then expand the Kremlin's espionage network throughout all corners of the continent. The ambitions of this network vary country to country, but all fall into at least one of the following three categories. In the first of these categories, let's just call it Category 1, is preservation of Russian interests in states which are seen by the Kremlin as being historical Russian territories. Essentially an espionage network which could ultimately assist in either expanding Russia's administered territory or be in place to supposedly protect the many pockets of Russian minorities who find themselves in post-Soviet states within Europe. Examples of states which fall into this category would be states such as Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and the Baltics, amongst others, who were formerly part of the USSR. Category 2 is the attempt to either maintain or strengthen ties between Russia and European states which are either seen as being presently aligned with or have the potential to be persuaded into aligning with Moscow in a geopolitical sense. These are states which are not viewed by the Kremlin as being historical Russian territories, nor were members of the USSR, but are simply seen as either current or potential allies of the states. Classic examples of Category 2 states would be the likes of Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. By default, everything else on the continent falls into Category 3, which is representative of areas that the Kremlin views as being prozapadny, or westernized. The states in this category are predominantly in Western Europe and Scandinavia, and the ambitions of Moscow's espionage network in these territories obviously differs from those in place in Categories 1 and 2, as instead of acting in order to try and directly benefit the Russian state by either maintaining its influence or trying to forge new alliances, Category 3 focuses purely on disruption, more specifically, the disruption of westernized ideology. This has allowed for Russia to maintain a very strong intelligence gathering network within Western Europe since the start of its Ukrainian invasion, and work its way around the practically enforced EU expulsions of Russian diplomats from member states. On average, around 15 of the Kremlin's diplomats have been sent back to Moscow, per EU member state. Austria has obliged in this trend, but only reluctantly, 11 months after the initial invasion, and only sent 4 supposed diplomats back to Russia. Additionally, Russia's espionage hub in Vienna has not only allowed them to maintain a lot of its pre-existing espionage network in Western Europe, but it has also actually allowed them the opportunity to continuously expand it, through engaging potential sleeper agents. For those unaware, a sleeper agent is an agent who is in place in a target location, with the aim of firstly integrating themselves into a community before carrying out any actual espionage directives. Russian policy used to be to make contact with these potential sleeper agents actually in the target location or territory, but due to the heightened awareness around any Russian state activity, this has become difficult. But Austria offers an alternative. And to explain it, I'm going to utilize the recent cases of Bulgarians who have been caught operating for the Kremlin as intelligence assets inside the United Kingdom. What would have previously happened is that personnel acting on behalf of Russian intelligence would have made contact with potential sleeper agents inside either Bulgaria or the target location, which in this instance is the UK. Now, what Russia does is make contact with these potential assets online and invite them to Austria for a formal meeting, entirely circumventing any risk attached to having to operate within territories that have strict espionage laws. Russian intelligence officers in Vienna could quite literally just meet a potential sleeper agent in the open and be breaking no law whatsoever. But where is Austria as a state left in all of this? Well, the answer is in a polarized mess. As I mentioned before, while it's often perceived as being heavily westernized, the truth is actually very different. Austria is by far Russia's closest thing to an ally in Western Europe, and the ties between the two are significant. Economically, there are an estimated $25.5 billion worth of Russian assets in Austria, along with around $17.5 billion worth of debt owed by Austrian banks to the Russian state as of December 2022. Politically, there are also ties between the two, mainly through Austria's third largest political party, which is titled the Freedom Party, and is a right-wing populist party, which for a long time has maintained warm relations with the Kremlin. Austria's left-wing political parties have made attempts to have the country's espionage laws changed in order to deal with Vienna's new status as a hub of foreign intelligence. But so far, there's no indicators that this will happen anytime soon. And for Austria's security service, the BVT, this is a reputational problem, as the country's apparent unwillingness to prevent anti-Western agenda intelligence agencies from operating out of Vienna has led to Austria's services being restricted from access to the majority of Western European intelligence, with many suspecting that the BVT as an organization has become entirely corrupted by the Kremlin. Ultimately, Russia's espionage influence in Austria is undisputed, and most significantly, extremely effective. Unfortunately for the West, it shows no sign of slowing soon, and in any case, it would require amendments of the Austrian constitution for it to do so. Thank you for watching.